This is The Culture.
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Cinema Wave podcast. This time we are back. We're talking about Loki, Marvel's newest Disney Plus season 2. I am one of your hosts. My name is Darian Scalamoni. I am joined as always by Michael Peniston.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be back. How you doing, Darian?
I'm good, man. I'm good. We missed last week.
Yes.
We are going to cover 2 episodes in this one episode of Cinema Wave, where we're going to cover Loki season 2, episodes 2 and episode 3. So we'll go in order. Let's start with episode 2. We talked a little bit off camera about this. I don't think our opinions are too different, but I did not enjoy this episode. This might be the only episode of Loki that I have not enjoyed thus far. And I think a big part of it for me was that there was a really big problem with pacing. And we talked even in the first episode, there's so much confusion and chaos that happens within the writing and the structure of what Loki is. So not having a handle on the pacing and the tone and the editing of this series makes it feel a lot crazier when it's not sort of flowing, at least to me. How did you feel about the episode?
I definitely agree that the pacing was all over the place. I feel like it's Loki, especially after seeing the first season, Loki just tackles so much, especially in terms of setting up a lot for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so, like we talked about in the last episode, the stakes going into the season were already super high, and there were already a lot of things to have to deal with. And the pacing for this episode was all over the place with a lot of things that didn't really seem as important to the overall story.
Yeah.
And so I agree that it was a lot of things to tackle. The pacing was all over the place, and it definitely could have been done better.
I was going to say, I don't think there was a lot like you just talked about. There's so much in this episode that doesn't feel essential.
Yeah.
And that's where there's so much filler, but it's not, and I shouldn't even say it's filler. It's just, it doesn't do a good job of making you care, which is crazy because Loki's a character that, again, was, you shouldn't say he's sidelined, but he was a villainous character for so long. And now he's the standout, especially in like the Disney Plus of it all. Like a lot of the television series haven't worked. Loki's the only show to get a season 2 so far. And so the episode takes you, we're on the Sacred Timeline. We're back in 1977 and Loki goes to a movie premiere in London, and it's him, it's Mobius, it's B-15. And they're trying to track down the location of X5, who is played by Raphael Castle. And we talked, again, a little bit off camera. You had thought that you saw him in season 1. If he was in season 1, it definitely wasn't like a role that people knew or were aware of him. He had a focus on him a little bit in episode 1 of this season, where he's talking to some of the elders, but he sort of takes center stage on a lot of this episode. And I think part of it too was he wasn't believable in his role as like this like movie star sort of like, oh, like I'm this standout guy and you want to keep your attention on me. I didn't think that he did a good job in this version of the character in the Sacred Timeline. And I thought so much of the London sequence in general was all over the place and the comedy wasn't hitting. And it was like one of the only times where I felt even Loki and Mobius, it didn't feel like the banter was real there.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. It was, first of all, X5's character, X5, right? That's
yes.
His name. Yeah. First of all, his character was just completely thrown into the midst, like with a lot of things to his character too in this episode. But it a lot of it for sure didn't land. He also kind of like brought in that area of like the TVA that was still trying to be like on like the upbringing where like you showed that he had a connection to Sylvie in some way. But once again, like, and we could talk a little bit more about that, but once again, like for his character to be the one to kind of like transition into that and bring that into this episode, none of it felt right.
It wasn't authentic at all. And so much of what we talked about last week was we wanted Loki and Sylvie to have this organic, and it should feel earned. It should have felt like really important and really deep to the audience when Loki finally gets to Sylvie.
Yeah.
And there's so much emptiness in them meeting because of the through line of trying to get through to this guy to find out where she is. I thought it was lazy writing. And again, there's so much in this episode where I felt they staggered, where in past episodes, whether it be season 1 or even the premiere, they find a way to make you still be invested despite how insane the plot is and how crazy this environment is. I thought that this episode could have been something where you interweaved Loki trying to discover and find out where Sylvie is on his own, and it would have been that exploration aspect that I would have enjoyed more than them basically following the tale of X5, like for majority of the episode.
Yeah, because the majority of the episode was really like rooted in that interrogation scene, and I even tried to play a lot of the comedy aspects into like that, and it didn't really land. I agree that having that Loki Sylvie moment definitely needed to be a moment of it needed to be more rewarding for Loki, I feel like, and for us, that because we saw where it was left off, and we had a little bit of like a glimpse of that reunited moment for them in the first episode when you kind of saw her in that dream sort of sequence thing, but again, it just didn't feel authentic. None of it felt real. X5 was too much of a focus on this episode, and again, and like you said, his performance just really didn't
Yeah, I think they put too much weight on him to kind of carry this again through line for something that should have just hit better with the audience. I don't think that bringing together Loki and Sylvie through a character that we barely know was a smart point to a jumping off point for this season, because they finally meet up when he gets the answers and he's like, I don't want to take you there anyway. I don't want to see this person. And Loki's like, you have to take us. The interrogation scene too, I think it goes on too long. I think there's aspects of it, like, again, like you could tell that it was obvious that he wasn't locking out Mobius. Like it was a plot between the two of them. And there was something too where when you get to that moment where they finally lock eyes and the music sort of comes in, it had like these really melodic tones, and you're trying to shift focus on Loki and Sylvie, and it doesn't, like, I didn't feel it as an audience member. And I'm like, this was something that at the end of the first season, so much that they had gone through, I felt for him, especially to Loki, like getting kicked through that time door and being amidst all the craziness that came with where the TVA was, and Sylvie disappears. She's working at a fucking McDonald's and they meet, and it's not anything. You don't feel any aspect of care. And I think that so much of it was just, I don't know, man. It was poor. It was something where it relates, and it gives me this PTSD of like where Marvel is right now, where they're in this really weird period where they're trying to make things connect and they're trying to make things happen, but there was so much more thought, I felt, that went into other aspects of the MCU prior to Endgame. Like everything was focused on that singular goal of getting us to the end of this story and this saga, which we talked about last week. But this episode, like I said, was just a little bit like a small version of where I think we're at with Marvel, where it's like they used to be dependable. You used to be able to go and, like, even for example, like Iron Man 2 is not a film that a lot of people hold in high regard in terms of their ranking for the MCU, right? But there's so much in that movie that is essential to character development of some of the characters that have like really good character moments. Like even Justin Hammer to me is a character that like I would love to be explored again in the MCU. But then you have characters like this, like X5, who, and no offense to Raphael Castle, like I'm sure he's great in other things. Like shout out to you, man, getting a paycheck, you're with Marvel. But there was something about his portrayal of this character in this 1970s London too that I just didn't buy, and I didn't get into it. And he was trying to play this snarky sort of version of a character, but he was also whiny, and there was a lot of room for improvement. I felt
the one thing I will give Marvel the benefit of the doubt with this episode and with X5 especially is that he did help showcase for a lot of the TVA workers that trueness in that they are variants and that they are able, that they came from somewhere, that it isn't, their lives aren't just the TVA, which a lot of them were brainwashed into thinking.
Yeah.
And that they all have lives outside of this, and or at least had a life, you know, at one point. And so he's a good, I guess, example of showcasing that, like, okay, like maybe we might get to see more, like maybe we've seen that he was an actor outside, if he actually was in the first season and was a TVA member, because I only really saw a photo of him in like a uniform. That doesn't really mean he was in the first season for sure, but maybe it does open the door to opportunity to really see a lot of these other lifestyles that a lot of these TVA members would have been living, and especially Mobius, because I know that that's been, we talked about the last week, that's like been an ongoing sort of theme about it's like this season, trying to figure out more about his character. And I did actually see one thing online as well, that happened at the end of the episode. It was I don't remember if it was at the very last scene or if it was like an after credit scene, but there was a scene where Sylvie was outside of the McDonald's, and she was talking to like a young boy. And it once again did not feel important at all. It just felt like they just threw something in there. But I did see someone try and connect dots, and that there's a chance that maybe that's Mobius as a young boy.
Whoa, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
That maybe that's why Sylvie's there, and that alone opens up my mind to, oh snap, like what could she really be doing? Like, because I do think it's there's a deeper reason as to why she's there. I don't think it's obviously just her running from a lot of things. But I do also want to use this as kind of like a way to transition into another big thing that happened and get your thoughts on this episode. They had that moment where you did find out that a few of these people were working for what essentially was the TVA members trying to kind of like upstart the TVA again and kind of like bring it back in their own way. And you saw that moment where they killed off all those branches, all those branch timelines.
Yeah.
And some could compare that to Thanos, you know, like a Thanos level snap, because it has that, like, a lot of people died.
Yeah.
They kind of, as for a heavy moment like that, like all you really saw was a few of their reactions.
They gloss over that shit so terribly. Right. And this is what I'm talking about, where we're talking about the writing, right? Where that's a moment that should feel, as an audience member, there's so much attention to detail in the first season of Loki about separate timelines, about different variants, about different versions of these characters. And I do appreciate that it is a little bit more internal this season, right? Like you were talking about, we're starting to learn some more about some of these characters. I like getting to see a little bit more of Casey. I like adding in OB in the series and things like that. And Mobius, I, as a viewer, do hope eventually, whether it's this season, it's a third season of Loki, it's a future MCU project, we get to see him like on the jet ski. We get to see him with his family, like these things that he's alluded to for so long. But that moment in particular that you're referring to was another thing where it's just like, how does this not have weight to it? Like, why is it that there are not even like there are millions of people dying and there's no reference to it? And it's because, is it not the sacred timeline? That's a deeper layer that there are going to be people that are going to be asking that question. And if it doesn't, again, if the sacred timeline is the MCU, right, if that's what we're working within, then why did you spend so much time trying to sell us on it in the first season if it isn't as valuable to you now?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that was a situation where, to be honest with you, until you brought it up to me, like I forgot that it happened, which is kind of mind blowing. And again, the episode, by the time this episode comes out, we're like 2 days away from the fourth episode coming out in a 6-episode limited series. But yeah, man, I don't know. It's just there was something about this episode in particular and that moment too, where it just felt very glossy and it didn't feel like it had its role in terms of being entrenched in what was important in this story overall. And I don't know if we're ready to transition yet to episode 3. But it's also basically forgotten about in episode 3 because episode 3 is very contained in its own universe and a different timeline. Well, we're still in the sacred timeline, but we're at a different point in time, centuries ahead, and it's never brought up again. So I don't know. It's how did you feel about it? Did you feel similarly?
Yeah, I did feel very similar. I don't know. I feel like it was just strange. It was just really weird. I feel like it was strange how X5 segued that whole thing, and we never saw anything else to it. I don't know. The whole episode was just it was not good, to be honest. Like there were small things in the episode, I will say, that I did enjoy. Like there was a small conversation bit between Loki and Mobius where they were enjoying the cake, where they were trying to.
Oh yeah, the key lime pie. Yeah.
Yeah, and like moments like that, I guess, are kind of nice, where you can like a still moment like that with these Marvel characters. But like, it just wasn't good, and to throw so many major things in there, covered by things that weren't important, like X5, and I don't know, it really fell through.
Yeah, I would say, to go off your point, two things that I think are promising about the episode. That chemistry is still, like I said, it might not have been throughout the whole episode like I liked with Loki and Mobius, but that moment in particular, you're right. It kind of shows the human side of these characters and the relationship they're building. Natalie Holt, by the way, the composer of the series, I think has so much fun, and definitely in the next episode too that we're going to talk about. But it's so cool jumping from different time periods where she can kind of play around with music and enhance the score in that way.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a standout to me in terms of the second episode and just the series in general.
Yeah, that is really cool. That's actually something I didn't even like notice, that like the it is matching where they at in the times that they're in. So that is really cool.
Yeah, and I think a good transitional point to the third episode, which again, if you guys didn't surmise from that, we did not like the second episode.
No.
But episode 3, you see Natalie Holt with that old-timey, the ding 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 da ding ding, like the old school kind of polka tones with the Marvel theme, which I thought was really creative and really awesome. And this was an episode that we haven't talked about it yet, like together. I love this episode. I thought this reminded me so much of Loki, but it was also very different because we're playing in a different time period, way in the past, and we finally get the reveal of Victor Timely. So give me your overall thoughts on the episode to start, and then we can dive into some of the details of it.
Yeah, no, this was a great episode. All around, honestly, just from the start, when you saw Renslayer, am I saying Renslayer?
Yes, Ramona Renslayer, yeah.
When you saw her drop the little dialogue with Miss Minutes, and then her drop the book, and then you see it's the young Victor Timely. Like, even like that alone had me like, I was like at the edge of my seat, like, oh, like Marvel's back, baby. Yes. And so, but no, overall it was just such a good episode. Like you said, it was very much more condensed. And with that, they could do a lot more. I loved seeing the introduction to Renslayer and Miss Minutes coming back, and then still continuing the Loki Mobius from the last episode. I still don't really fully understand how or where they came from, how they came into it, but it still worked. Victor Timely, man. Victor Timely is just
so Jonathan Majors is such a talent, and it's hard because he's still amidst this whole potential crisis on his career with court dates, and we don't know what's going to happen with him in general. But what I can speak to is that I think his job as Kang the Conqueror and all the different versions that he's portrayed so far, whether it's He Who Remains in the first season, Victor Timely in this season, fully fledged Kang the Conqueror in Quantumania, which I still don't even really think he was. That was like Kang at like 40% maybe.
yeah.
He's so good in the role. And Victor Timely, it was a different reveal. And to me, because they showed the exact scene, which is in the Quantumania post. Is it Quantumania post credit? I think it is. It's one of the post credits for one of the recent Marvel movies. I believe it's Quantumania. And it might not be. It might be a different film, but it's the exact scene where they show Victor Timely, the close up on him, and then it cuts to Loki, and he turns to Mobius, and he goes, "That's him," and he looks terrified. That was a moment that played so much better in the context of what the episode was, because Major's job as Timely, he's just this sort of, he's definitely not a fool, but he's bumbling around. He's also very smart with the way that he's stuttering over words. Like he talks, what is that one thing where it's a great line delivery where he talks about something in terms of how he knows better. Like it's basically him saying like, it's up to interpretation that I might know better. And then they all go like, and then he's like, then you. Like, I just know a little bit more than you guys do. That doesn't mean I know everything. And Screen Crush actually talked a little bit about how there's really great like racial overtones in that, where if you guys haven't watched the episode yet, stop fucking watching because this is spoiler heavy. We tell you that every week, but jump on board. 1893, we're in Chicago. We're at the World Fair. At this time, there weren't people that looked like him that were doing things like this.
Yeah, I kind of thought about that.
And the way that they craft the dialogue in this episode, and similar to how you were talking about the transitional part, even early on in the episode where Renslayer drops the book, we get transported into Victor Timely's origin, essentially. There's so much more care in this episode. There's so much more effort in this episode, and you can tell it from the jump. And that whole sequence with Victor Timely, the introduction to his character, being on stage, addressing all these people, creating his own temporal loom, mirroring where we're at so far in this season, it was like the perfect midpoint. I was like, all right, like this show got me back on board. Like episode 1, I felt it was comfortable. It was comfortable in the Loki setting. I really loved seeing Ke Huy Quan, but you can't carry a whole show on the back of one guy.
Yeah.
Again, episode 2, we obviously didn't like. This episode just like got me right back in, similar to you.
100%. And it's honestly really crazy to me how Jonathan Majors can keep the same character and certain mannerisms, sort of, but still change it enough to be a new character in itself. I don't know, like how you brought up the stuttering and his character. Like every King interpretation at this point that we've seen has had that stutter, but just in like a way to themselves. And so it's just like it is really crazy to see just these characters be brought to life by him in this way. But Victor Timely especially was just, for the time that we were seeing a lot of things and how a lot of things were playing out, I just thought that it was not only was certain things that he was doing, how things were written, everything was just really just genius. Honestly, I thought for this episode, I thought the storytelling was just really good. And there were a lot of moments, I feel like, where we got to see Loki in a stronger sort of light than we had before, and I've kind of thought this for the past couple of episodes with this season. But Loki's a strong motherfucker.
He is. Well, people forget, and there's a great moment again with Loki and Mobius in this episode where we see the giant statues of Odin and Thor, and it's Bolter the Brave instead of it being Loki, and he's like, "What is going on here? Like, where am I at?" And then Mobius has that moment where he turns to him and he goes, "You know, I like often forget that like you're related to these guys." And you forget that Loki is a god. Yeah. And that's what made the threat actually a legitimate one in the first Avengers film. And that's the part that we start to forget as viewers, because we're falling in love with this version of the character that is seeking out justice and is trying to save the world, even though he's someone that has tried to take down Earth, as he's tried to do, or Earth realm, whatever he basically called it in the Avengers. But the way that he interacts with Timely too, there, like I said, there's that terrifying moment for him, and they craft it in such a way where there's nothing about Timely's character you didn't already know that he was Kang that would make you nervous. There's nothing about his version of this character that he's very timid, he's very stoic, he's incredibly intelligent, he's not violent. He has that moment where he obviously lets Ravonna go, which we'll get to, but so much of that is baked in a plan that Miss Minutes has, who also plays a major role in this episode. But so basically, he's showing off the temporal loom. He is able to escape. He's on the run because he basically sells this machine that's faulty to a financier. He's chasing him around, and he escapes them, and then he gets scooped up by Ravonna and Miss Minutes. They're able to get him out of there, and they go to where he's living. There's a really nice moment where you start to see the romantic relationship develop between Victor or Kang and Ravonna, because in the comics they have a romantic entanglement. I don't know if you knew that or not. So they have that, and then you start to see Miss Minutes, like in her brain, she's like, "Oh, like what about me?" She's like, "I might just be AI, but that doesn't mean I don't have feelings." And it's like, oh boy, here we go, because you're sort of laying the groundwork in the past season of her talking about this person, how powerful he is, who they answer to, and then she's obviously the one that's there with He Who Remains in the end of the finale when Sylvie and Loki get there. So They start to plan their revenge out, and we start to see this thing where they go on the boat. Ravonna and Miss Minutes are talking with Victor, and Miss Minutes convinces him to basically like kick her off the boat. He's like, she's trying to play you, like she doesn't care about you really. She just is trying to get you for your information, whatever. I forget the exact dialogue. But then he goes back to his lab, which is filled with a bunch of really cool Easter eggs. But Miss Minutes has a very obvious romantic attraction as an AI clock to Victor Timely, which I want to know I just covered a lot of stuff. What you thought about the sequence leading up to it, and also her role as somebody that, to me, it was creepy, but it worked in like the perfect way. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious on your thoughts on a lot of it.
I definitely think that the sequence of it all worked out really well. I loved the buildup of Miss Minutes, especially on that boat scene. They did a really good job of hiding things in certain shots that were huge in terms of building up to that. Like when you had that sort of intimate moment between Renslayer and Victor, where they talked for the first time, and she ended it where it was like I'm like, this is going to be a really good partnership, and immediately you saw his face kind of like, oh,
that's what it was. Yes.
And then, but if you saw Miss Minutes' face at like the bottom, and like it was blurred a little bit because she was in the background, but you can see her kind of like smirk a little bit, and you're like, oh snap, like she realizes, and then immediately she brings that up, that partnership. And so the buildup was so sneaky and so little that it worked great, but you could still see that it was more than just her wanting that partnership. You could see that you could see it was jealousy. You could see a lot of it was jealousy. I just didn't know for sure if they were going to go to the level that they did when it was Miss Minutes and Victor having that intimate interaction. And I thought again, it was genius because she was crazy, but at the same time, she was kind of justified. like when you heard what she was saying, and like at the end of time, like the time that they spent, and like it was like they were together to a certain degree, and like, and he built her to have emotion, and so like it's almost like, why else would you do this, and so that's where it made sense. So I feel like, as crazy as it was and as crazy as it played out, I felt like it was all justified, and it landed perfectly.
Yeah, and he talks about it, right? He goes, "Oh yeah, it was a perfect friendship." Yeah. And then she's like, "I wouldn't call it that, honey," or whatever she says. It's like, it's amazing. But you're right. He gives her that autonomy. He gives her the allowance to make her own decisions, and she does have a care for like managing timelines, but the grand scheme of it all is that she doesn't really give a shit about the TVA. She just helps things run, because the overall thing is she wants this person, he who remains, Kang, Victor Timely, to be in love with her, who is built as an artificial intelligence. And you have that moment where she basically puts herself onto the mannequin, which is so creepy, but it's so great. And Tara Strong is so good in the role that I missed Miss Minutes, like in a way, like there was something missing throughout these first couple of episodes. And even Ravonna, like being able to see her, because Gugu Mbatha Raw, I think, is such a great, like, underrated talent. I think she has such a presence on screen no matter when she's on there. Mm-hmm. And we're gonna see sort of these key players start to show up again. Like, we were missing out on some of these people, and I feel like there's still so much to go with this season in terms of story. I've heard through rumblings from press that have gotten, I know a lot of press got episodes 1 through 4, that 3 was great and that 4 should be great. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot to explore. I think there's a lot more that we're still going to see happen. We do see, again, you talked about the power. Loki, mm-hmm. At the end of the episode, starts to basically mess around with his powers, and Sylvie again is there to try to stop things mm-hmm. from going in a direction that she doesn't want. What did you think about the presence of Sylvie in this episode, and do you think that so far her role in this season is satisfying enough for you?
I'm going to answer the second part of that question first, actually. Okay. No, I don't. I think that her role in this season has been satisfying. I think, like we said before, like Loki and Sylvie had such a powerful moment where they left off in season 1, and then they kind of just went their separate ways, and like we're still waiting for that big moment, and we've gotten it, but it's still not what we're waiting for. And since then, I guess because it hasn't been what we're looking for, every time that I see her, at least on screen, still isn't as satisfying.
It's like you're waiting for the shoe to drop still,
Yes,
right?
exactly. And we know that at this point, we know not fully what her intention is completely, but we do know that she's trying to kill Kang again, because that will then obviously stop a certain point of she'll be able to live freely. Let's just say, like, that's the best thing to say right now with that situation. But it still necessarily didn't feel right. Like, it just felt like it was like another force that they needed to stop Loki and Mobius from getting to him, which at the end of the episode, that's what happened. Like, that's what we got. And this whole episode was a lot of, not that it was bad in any way, but this whole episode was a lot of just people kind of getting their hands on Victor just to get to a place that we kind of knew was going to come. Like, I kind of knew Loki, and just to kind of keep the story and things going. But like, I don't know. I just feel like they could have done more with Sylvie's character. I don't know if it could have been in this episode, because honestly, no matter what, I was so focused on Victor. Like, that was and to bring back Renslayer and Miss Minutes in the same episode, it's just Sylvie just for sure was not even really a focus. At this point. And I mean, she showcased some cool powers.
She shows up out of nowhere again, and it's a situation where I do agree with you. I think Victor was Victor and Miss Minutes probably the 2 MVPs of this episode. Mm-hmm. But with the Sylvie part, when Sylvie and Loki first interact in the first season, they have like animosity towards each other, but then they start to build the relationship, and you start to see it play out through dialogue. You start to see it play out through writing. And with this season so far, they don't have those moments where there's enough time in between, there's enough meaningful dialogue where you feel for her character anymore. And what I'm worried about is this season going in a direction where at the end of it, Victor or another version of Kang, whoever we end up with at the end of the season, goes up with Ravonna. Miss Minutes, I have a feeling, is going to kick the can. I think Miss Minutes is going to die, or whatever's going to happen to her as a program is going to sort of cease. Mm-hmm. And Loki and Sylvie are going to come back together, which is going to make her whole first season arc. Like, how would they come together again? And in a way where they're both understanding that they have to sort of take this guy out. Like, she was so adamant that she didn't give a shit. She wanted to kill this guy because to her, in her mind, her decision was justified. Loki obviously doesn't think so, and his whole goal is to get to her, to speak with her and seek her out for help. But that, to me, I want more from that. I want more from the relationship. I don't know if she's going to die at the end of the season. Do you think that, like, do you have any predictions for what they do with her character? Because right now, I don't even know if there's enough to really base that off. And we see that moment in the first episode, which might be a flashback, might be a flash forward. Mm-hmm. But I just feel like with her, it's sort of underwhelming so far.
Yeah. I definitely don't think there's enough sort of source to be able to make that decision as to what could happen with her character at all, to be honest. But I do think that they're playing into this theme, and maybe this could be the theme for this could be the prediction for Sylvie and Loki. I am noticing that no matter how hard they try to showcase Loki as a hero or something, this not to a full extent as what I'm about to say, but I am noticing that the more that they showcase Loki as a hero, no matter what, things will still end up unlucky. Because that's just Loki. He's the god of mischief. It's everything unlucky. And so I feel like maybe they won't ever end up together, just playing into the fact that they are just so unlucky that even love is an unlucky thing for them, even though they are the same exact person.
Yeah.
And that they, it's, so I mean, like, I can see something like that playing into it. I also could see that playing into it because we are still dealing with a Kang variant, and knowing that Kang is gonna play a big role in this whole phase, and so obviously like the unluckiness will probably play into that area of Victor. But as far as Sylvie's character, I have no idea what they could do with her, or what they will do with her. At this point, I don't even really care. So, how did you then feel about the way that they chose to end the episode, where Mobius and Loki they were able to get Victor back, and they were to kick. No, it was Sylvie who kicked
Ravonna
back, because we had that moment where Sylvie kind of turned.
Mm-hmm.
And she had that kind of heroic moment where she decided not to kill.
Yeah.
Essentially, and they kicked Verona and Miss Minutes back to the end of time, where you saw.
The zombified version of He Remains, which was such a cool visual.
Yes. How did you feel about that?
About them taking him back, or just all of it?
Just all of those.
Okay, so in terms of them taking him back to the TVA, you knew it had to happen. They have that moment of dialogue. I think it's in this episode. Or it might be in last episode where they're kind of discussing between the two of them, Loki and Mobius, and Loki's like, I don't think it's a good idea for you to fucking bring that guy here. Mm-hmm. He goes, I think that's a major problem. Mobius is like, well, if we don't have him here, then we're going to have the temporal aura, and that's what we need in order to get to where we need to get to basically save the day, essentially. So, again, you can call it lazy writing. It is what it is. He's going to be there. I'm interested to see that dynamic. I'm interested to see what's going to happen with him being there. And again, with shit hitting the fan, like, I just think that he's too smart. This character's too smart. And Loki might not fall for it, but Mobius could. There's other people there. And then the overall, like I said, the visual of being at the end of time, I think is really cool. They didn't get out of there, right? So I'm very curious to see how they get out of there. Who's going to work alongside her and Miss Minutes to get them out of there, because someone's going to have to do something. So I do think that we're going to have... This started to fill the gaps, episode 3, of what we really appreciated and liked from the first season that made it so enjoyable, right? Mm. I think episode 4 is going to be one that's like really valuable. Like, we're going to look back and we're going to be like, this might be the one that kind of defies the odds of this season not being as good as the first. I think something really major could happen. I have nothing to speculate in terms of what we can see, because I think it's really hard to make predictions in a show like this where there's so much up in the air. But I am curious to see, and this was definitely my favorite episode of the season so far.
I agree. I also heard and read somewhere online that there is a rumor that in the next few episodes there is a chance that we might see one or two other variants of Kang.
Okay.
Played by Jonathan Majors. How do you feel?
I think that would make sense. Mm-hmm. I think that we could start to see all the pieces come together and have these different versions of Kang sort of messing with members of the TVA, some of them going along with Ravonna. Mm-hmm. Maybe that Kang is the way that they're able to get them out of the end of time. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's interesting. Like I said, I like that this is a self-contained story somewhat in this season. Mm-hmm. We're not bouncing around as much. But then at the same time, there's a part of me that it's lost that sci-fi flair that it's so used to having from the first season. And I'm hoping that whether another version of Jonathan Majors is Kang's show up, because we have the Council of Kangs, which we also saw in a post-credit scene. We know there's so many different versions of this character that are going to come. I think it's important to continue to introduce these versions of the characters, but I want them to make it... I'm worried about what's happening with Loki, because the show is called Loki. There's not a lot happening with his character. He's just chasing something. And there was so much character development in the first season with him that I'm worried that, like, even if this episode 4 is a big episode, I hope it's a big episode in terms of development. I want the story to sort of trudge along. I want the characters to understand and find out things that they weren't apparent of going into it. I don't need a giant action set piece, which we've talked about so many times on here. Like, Moon Knight fucked it up. Secret Invasion fucked it up. There's too many times, and those are finales. But you got to stop trying to make it where it's this giant action set piece, because you have some of that in the final episodes of the first season of Loki. Well, I guess the second to last episode is where they have all the variants, right, with Richard E. Grant. But there's so much other good, weird shit in that episode that makes it so good. So, and again, this is they filmed all this before all the Marvel TV problems. Sort of like the article started to come out. We posted one on our website about it, about all the things that are happening with the production of Daredevil getting shut down, and now they're going to start actively seeking out showrunners for TV, which good on you, Marvel. You're finally fucking learning. I need this episode to be amazing because I thought this episode was really good. I didn't think it was great, but I thought it was really good. This next episode needs to kind of like blow my socks off for me to like be like, all right, I think that I'm excited to see how this story is going to wrap up. I'm excited to see what is going to happen with Loki's character. I'm excited to see if something is going to come of Mobius. I'm interested to see this potential relationship between Ravonna and Loki, or Ravonna and Kang rather. So they got a lot to do. They got 3 episodes. They got a lot to do. But overall, I think we both enjoyed this episode. No?
Yeah, no, definitely enjoyed it. Definitely was a better thing, a better release, should I say, of Marvel after years of trash.
Yeah, it hasn't been good recently.
Yeah, no.
No.
But yeah, definitely a good episode, thankfully.
Nice.
Yes.
All right, guys. Well, I think that's going to do it for our review of episodes 2 and 3, the spoiler review for Loki. You guys can stream it on Disney Plus. Make sure if you guys don't already, you guys are liking the video, you guys subscribe to the channel, leave comments, share with your friends, your family. We're building this out. We're trying to give you guys more content. If there's anything else you guys want to see in terms of what we cover, please let us know. Let us know your thoughts on Loki episodes 2 and 3. Just signing off. I am Darian Scalamoni.
And I'm Mikey Peniston.
And we'll see you guys next time.